Welcome. I'm Christine, and I'm coming to you today from the Rhoda Center in Teaneck, New Jersey. I want to wish all my former students a heartfelt hello, because I haven't seen you in a year. Anyway, okay, so, you know, from all my years of teaching you, I love all the spring flowers. And a couple weeks ago, we had snow just last week. So a few weeks ago, walking in the woods in my hometown of Maywood, and also at the Fort Lee Historic Park, I saw these crocus growing up through the leaves. The crocus are usually the harbinger of spring and the first sign of good things to come, new beginnings. They're a very easy flower shape, and I thought it'd be nice to start with something simple for you to work on at the beginning of our new session of a new year. And again, for those of you that have been with me before, I would compare the crocus flower here to a tulip shape, a tulip flower. These are smaller, they grow lower to the ground, they're small and dainty flowers, but the cup shape of them when they're open resembles a tulip in many ways, and we'll get to that. So before, I know I'll end up doing a painting for you, a demonstration of watercolor. I'm doing a small demonstration, but I'll try to squeeze in a variety of sizes and shapes of the different stages of growth of this particular crocus flower. I just want to talk about the flower itself. I remember as a kid, you know, like if you have late snowfalls in February and March, you can see the tops of the daffodil tips coming up, the leaves, but these little guys come up full bloom. There they are. And they come in a beautiful range of colors. They're a very delicate, small flower, and again, so when they first come up, you're going to see them very tightly closed. I'll use my hands because they represent it. Very tight, and they look a lot like this. And I would compare them to the shape of a light bulb, okay? So the petals are all tight, and then as days and weeks go on, they're going to open up, all right? So again, this is a simple flower. It has 6 petals. The traditional, I'd say, average tulip also has 6 petals. There are more sophisticated varieties of tulips. They're multi-petaled tulips, like the parrot tulip, where you might have 20, 30 petals. This is nothing like that. So the crocus flower, again, it's growing on many of the northern continents. I know from Asia, Europe, the North American continent, and it comes in a variety of colors. You'll have white, yellows, beautiful blue violets, and I'd say not pink, but red violets, okay? So again, you can see in this variety of an arrangement here, these are all small 15 by 12 paintings, and these all have backgrounds. So I call these like a full study, and I'm also giving you multiple heads here, so you're really getting to experience the look of how, and this is how they grow. They come up and there's multiple heads off of like a root system, of bulbs. All right, and their leaves are very thin and sinewy, unlike a tulip leaf, which looks like a rabbit ear. These resemble more grass-like, kind of wild, hairy, thin leaves of the plant. Okay, so again, I just want to talk about the delicacy and the history, little history, of the crocus flower. So the name is taken from Latin, crocatus, and the crocatus name really means yellow saffron. The Greeks also used it in their cooking and for headdresses. It's a very perfumed flower. The Egyptians also used the flower to make perfumes that they would actually spray on guests at fine banquets. The saffron comes from the stamens and the stigmas that are inside the center of the flowers. Between 80 and 90 varieties of species in the crocus family, not all of them give off those beautiful saffron stamens that are collected and the stigmas that are collected for their saffron content. I did have a photograph here. Here it is. So this is a variety. Here's a blue, beautiful blue that's opened up. So these are the stamens These are the stigmas, and usually like in a tulip, and I'll be getting to this, but in the center of these flowers, you'll have usually one stigma and many stamens. This particular variety of crocus has 3 stigmas, and those are, you can see, they're very long, elongated. These come at the full maturity of the plant. Those are what are picked for saffron, and saffron is a high commodity spice, and it's also very useful for antioxidants. So this flower is actually grown, just that variety, just for the picking of those beautiful saffron stamens. Okay, so we're getting to know the flower. So it's nice to know a little history of the bulb and the plant. But now we have to get familiar with drawing and painting the flower. So even though we're doing a watercolor, we need to, and we're doing a representational image of the crocus, we need to get familiar with this flower's unique characteristics. Why? What shapes? The shapes of the petals, the shapes of its stems, the shapes of the leaves are all unique to that particular flower. So as a more realistic artist, you want to always capture the personality of the flower and its identifying features so that you definitely know, oh, that's not a daffodil, that's not a peony, that's a crocus. It's not a tulip, these are crocuses. So, okay. All right, so again, I always, just like anything else, if you're going to go to an exercise class, you need to do some stretches before you start. Before you start doing a formal drawing or a formal painting, let's say a formal study. I wouldn't consider this a formal painting, but it's definitely going to be a considerate study of a botanical crocus plant. I actually did some pen and inks here, so again, for those of you that are watching from my students, some of you are in my drawing class, some are in my watercolor class, so I'm trying to give you a little bit of both. All right, so I did do some pen and inks. This was done with just like an ordinary, like a Pentel felt tip pen. And I'm just doing some studies of the different stages of growth. So here's a crocus, and this is pretty life-size right here. They're little small bulbs the size of olives, similar to the bulb of a tulip. And here they shoot out, again, this beautiful long stem to the flower, and as well as its leaves. So I've drawn some different varieties of the stages of its opening as the flowers come apart. I started with one, you can space these out. If you know, in my head, I said I'm going to do 5 or 6 small illustrations here of showing you the growth. Just plan it out. I actually penciled some shapes in here. I usually draw freehand when I'm doing pen and ink. That's only after I become familiar with the flower and all of its characteristics. But I would pencil something in just to guide you. You can always erase those pencil marks after you've accomplished some pen work. Okay, so this is a simple contour. These are outline contour drawings. I gave it just a little touch of some shadowing with some contoured lines describing, here we have the back petal that's caved in concave. It's like this. The outside petals in the front are convex, so they're cupping over like this. So these are picking up light. The back petals that are curving inward toward the center of the plant are concave. They're coming in to see the shadow that this petal would have out in the sunlight. So it's darker inside here. Again, you're looking outside, all of these flowers have one light source. So even in a pen and ink drawing, a pencil drawing, a colored pencil drawing, or a painting, we need to be mindful, where is our light source? To the right, to the left, is it directly overhead? I usually suggest having one to the right or to the left. If you're working from photos that you picked up off the internet, from their seed companies and bulb companies, you can get a lot of information off to get beautiful pictures of these that they may not reproduce well when they're blown up, but it gives you enough of some studies to work from. So now you need to start arranging. So I've given them a nice isolated openness, right? This is basically, a linear contour drawing, and I've given some open negative spaces in between so you can appreciate the difference in shapes or the different stages of development here. Versus, this is a little more realistic as how they would grow in a cluster over here. I'll spend some time over here. Thank you. I want to welcome also my 2 assistants here, Zana and Andrea, and they've been so kind to help me assist film this for you. So here we have a collection. This is done with pen and ink. I certainly did a more sophisticated pre-sketch, plotting where I was going to have them. Now here you see how they grow in a cluster. So here you have the simple light bulb shape, but now they're overlapping as you see them growing as they would. It's almost like a bouquet tucked into the neck of a vase. They're kind of emanating from the bulbs that are all clustered together. So now you need to kind of plot and space them out. We have 5. I usually like odd numbers. When I'm doing like a study, 3, 5 is nice. That affords you the availability of more and more asymmetrical composition. So again, I do have, if I was to draw a cross vertical down the center of my composition and a horizontal, it's good to have the positive and negative shapes in each quadrant different from each other. So my positive quadrant up here, I've got 2 flowers with a few leaves. This is an interesting negative shape. If I come down here, this lower quadrant has 1 open flower versus the 2 closed up here. We go to this quadrant, there isn't really much to see, but it's a nice open space. And now I'm really having a nice play with obliques and diagonals that are leading the viewer into the cluster drawing. And again, the lower quadrant is just showing the bottoms of these 2 closed buds. So I have a nice variety from the 4 quadrants in that space. And these I just kind of play with. If you start with 1 or 2, you just intuitively kind of counterbalance your diagonals. And moving on, I've tried to create some patterns using the crocus flower. So I like these. I kind of gave them an Art Deco feeling. So you can see there's different stages. They're more open versus these are closed over here. In this one here, I have a variety where there's more closed, and then just these 2 in the lower part, which is more of a focal point, are more open. This flower here is kind of centered in the middle. I squeezed 4 in the top row, 3 in the bottom, so that there was no repetition of, the same amount of flower heads in the top row versus the bottom. And it gave me some interesting different size negative spaces. So my negative spaces, I filled in with ink, leaving the positive white leaf shapes. And it creates a beautiful lacy background. I could see these in a beautiful, like a filigree gate or something. But I had a lot of fun doing these. Again, you start with 1 and just kind of move to the right, left, move to the top again. I recommend you give yourself a limited perimeter to work in. And then space them out accordingly where there's some variety. These 2 are definitely overlapping. This is overlapping this one's overlapping those 2. Bottom row, the center one's overlapping a little bit of both. This one is a petal coming off. So there's a little variety in each one of them. They're not exactly the same. So it's not a boring, repetitious pattern that you're normally seeing, but I've incorporated, again, the development or the gestational stages of the crocus to create a very interesting ink design piece. Likewise, this is very similar. Again, these are all closed. I have more black open spaces here. And again, the bleeding out, my images are bleeding out to the right, left, top, and bottom, which really gives us more of a zoom-in kind of look, which to me gives it more of an intimate study of this flower shape. All right, so I want to get into this is for you at home, if you're watching. So again, I have some guidelines of these shapes. I have some things in front of me. This is just a copy of one of those. I also made some interesting copies. These come in pretty nice at Staples on cardstock. Some color copies. I shrank them down, I think 5%, just to fit them on and have a border all around them. So I'm looking at these again. This is a nice study of the different gestational. They're more closed at the bottom. They're starting to open. You can see this is my main focal point, this white one here. It's the fullest. And again, I want you to notice that I don't have it bullseye in the center. It's slightly off center, which I'll be talking about here. So here I'm getting to the stage of how you would plot out and position this flower head, and you would do the same with any other flower heads, and you'll see that in future classes, and how to get a nice composition. And so we'll be talking about planning a composition, and then we'll go through some contour drawings and some gestural drawings, just for you to get familiar with drawing this piece. Again, the looser your drawings, again, I always tell this to my classes, the looser your drawings, the looser your painting will be. The tighter your drawings come out, the tighter your painting will be that day. We all have different energy levels every day of the week. So I just want to warn you on that. You're also going to be drawn to different colors on certain days of the week. So let's talk about the colors too, which I'll mention up in here. So you can see the variety. Again, here you have some more purples and reddish violets. These are white, the crocus comes in white, but again, they're spaced around. I have a variety of shapes. I also look into lock-in shapes. By overlapping them, I'm locking them in. These are all up here. They're angled at certain angles so that it brings the viewer into your composition as opposed to leading the viewer out of your composition. What I want to talk about is the colors of these particular crocus. They're very happy. Yellows, bright yellows, whites. These hot pinks and purplish red violets. Very happy painting. And to me, the flower is happy. But then color, it has a story to tell in what colors you choose that day. So here's a cluster of white, light violets, and some deeper blue violets. And of course, these certainly have more of a somber, serene, more of a serious look to them. Usually the color purple is referred to as being majestic or dignified. But as looking up in here, you can see here's the same cluster, similar cluster where they're all closed. These are cool blue violets versus some warm, these are red violets, kind of a pink, a little bit of blue in them. The grasses are quite warm, but this is certainly a little happier in the warm pinks versus the cool, somber, serene feeling you get from this cluster here. So again, we all gravitate to certain colors. Some of you, my daughter had a teacher in grade school, she wore purple every day. She had a purple car, purple jewelry, purple accessories. That was her thing. She loved violet. I also have an older friend of mine, my father's secretary, Angie. She loves purple. Every year, Christmas gifts, birthday gifts, purple. So we all know people or have relatives that either are orange people, pink, hot pink people, or purple ladies, as I call them. So again, you'll gravitate towards a certain color. And again, you can do a mixture of all these colors. All right, so moving on, we'll get warmed up. So sometimes I'll do some stretches. I did stretches this morning, but it's good for you to loosen up. And again, I'm standing up and I'm working on this big board. So I'm going to use a lot of energy in my arm. If you're at home and you're sitting there, already sitting at a table, very tight, I guarantee you your elbows rested on the table. You're not going to put much energy into the drawing or the painting of this particular subject or any of your future paintings. So that's something to think about. Okay. So this is just black. I want to go over the anatomy of this flower. So there's different stages again. So the actual height of these is probably, realistically, I'm going to do like a light bulb. This is a little try. If I draw a light bulb, so here's a light bulb. I'm going to put that light bulb at an angle. And down here we have that screw-in point like this. Okay. Here's your light bulb. All right, so 6 petals. I always start with 1 petal. So let's start right here on the side. So this is going to be a close. It's going to come around here. That's 1. We have 1 in the center over here. We'll have 1 coming in here. That's turned around there, and then we have 3 in the back. So as we see in the back, these are all going to get foreshortened. So now we're looking at the back where these petals, watch my hand, are coming forward like this. So you're going to have a petal over here, and 1 in the middle. Okay, so that light bulb helped us draw more of a closed stage of the crocus, right over here. And then this all comes and tapers down, elongated, down to here, to a stem that goes into the ground, and then we come in with these beautiful, thin, sinewy leaves. So again, it's like a grass leaf. So I would definitely interrupt that lower stem And here we're just, well, that one's a little dry. I'm putting a lot of energy in this like kind of wispy look. So again, you're going to have all different sizes. And again, it can come up and interrupt the flower. We can incorporate those light yellow green. We can bring in some cool darker greens. But that light bulb helped us in picking out the closed shape, the early stages of the crocus. Let's go to a teacup. Okay, so now as the flower opens, very similar to the tulip, the petals are going to start opening. So I say for a guide, let's do a teacup. So again, I'm going to draw the teacup as if it's looking up to the right to the sun over here. So here's our teacup, like so. And again, you know, you got the handle, it's sitting in a saucer. Well, let's put a saucer on here, this might help you. So we'll have this little saucer coming around. All right. So now we need to have 6 petals coming up. So we're going to ignore this teacup, but it's going to help us draw what we see. So I'm looking at a stage where it's more open. So let's do, let's see, I'm trying to see where that's right. All right, so we're going to have a lot of foreshortening here. This is one petal that's coming out at us. So it's basically dropped out like this. And we're going to draw the under lip that we're seeing a little bit at the bottom here. This one, it's always one, if you draw one first, it'll overlap the petal to its right and the petal to its left. So then we're going to have a petal over here. And we're going to see a little bit of that. It's 2 petals. So now we're going to get into this side petal over here. And we'll get a side petal over here. Now we have this big back petal, like so. So as it opens, it's going to look more like this. That's a full opening. And then in the middle, you'll have, let's try some yellow. You'll have, usually it's the stigma in the center and the stamens on the outside. So some of these get, again, each species, each variety of these, it's a little different in the number of the pistils. I'm going to come with a little orange. Red, just to give it that, okay? So again, we've used light bulb, I'm going to write light bulb. Light bulb shape versus teacup. Closed. It's more closed. Okay, so I hope that helped a lot. Sometimes it's good. It's always smart to look at a certain shape, especially in flowers, and find a geometric, simplified, world-known shape that it can take in the circumference of the flower. So anything that helps you to draw this image, it's worth the mention. Okay, so now let's get into some loose drawing. So again, if you're at home, I'd be using an erasable pencil right now, or if you want to use colored pencils, that's good too, to do some of these in colored pencils. And we'll just play around with some opening and closing of some of these shapes. So let's talk about contour drawing versus more contour. Drawing. Contour versus gestural. Okay, so contour is basically what we just did here. We're defining the overall shape, and then we're going in and defining the interior shapes, the 6 individual petals that are making up this whole flower. So to start this in pencil, I would probably give myself a guide, again, depending on what stage you're looking at. So I'm going to do a little bit of like an elongated ellipse like this. So we're looking at contour drawings. I'm looking over here. You can see this is more of like a triangular shape. So I may just do something like this over here. So again, we're looking for contour, and we're basically looking to define the outside perimeter and the outlining of the individual parts. that shine over here. These are the back petals with a little bit here, there, and like so. So that's a nice contour drawing. And then again, I would interrupt the long stem at the base, again with some blades. And some of the blades of grass you'll see in some photos, or you can find these in the woods, or thin to thick. Here again, this is contour drawing. We're coming down with that stem. And here we're going to have this one coming down over here. We'll have this kind of come up over here. These petals on the side, so it's very foreshortened, coming down around there. In the center, I'm actually doing like a double line to show the curling of the outside of the petal coming in. There's a little bit of a lip coming over it. That would be a nice highlighted area for you. So those are two contour drawings of like a middle stage when they're starting to open. They're not closed and tight. And here's we have a gestural drawing. So gestural drawing is going to be a real quickness, multiple lines. It's almost as if your pen or pencil never leaves the surface of your paper. There's a wonderful sculptor, Giacometti, that sculpted these tall, skinny figures. I know his works are at the Guggenheim, but his drawings of his figures have all this energy. It looks like moving atoms working all around the figure, the head, the arms, the legs of the human body. It's that kind of energy you need to bring to a gestural drawing. So it's a little over-exaggerated. It almost looks like nervous energy. I'm just going to move this down a little. So here, I'm just looking at this flower over here. So here I'm going to start with this overall shape where I can go over and over. It's like this continuous line, and again, I want you to feel the back side of this, the inside. If you move down, I'm just going to move this a little bit over here. So you see how I have not stopped, I'll just keep going here. There was a lot of energy and action in that gestural drawing, okay? Some people like to paint like that. There's many abstract floral painters. You don't have to be a floral painter, but it's a different energy than something that's a little more controlled in a contour drawing. Okay. So what I want to go over is how you have, when I move to this over here, I want to talk about this. It's easier to see than my overlays. I have an overlay of composition, how I place the composition of my watercolor in general, but I'm going to just go through a few things. And in planning either a colored pencil drawing or a pastel or watercolor painting, and the placement, the thinking that goes into placement of a more finished piece with like multiple heads. So we have multiple flower heads. So let's give ourselves a perimeter. I always talk about the division of your quadrants. So we're dividing your good paper. If you're working in colored pencils or ink, you're working on Bristol paper. Again, if you're working on watercolor paper, I usually like to take my watercolor piece down on a board to give myself a clean perimeter all around for the finished piece. But I'll always consider my 4 quadrants in the placement. So I always start with one flower. I gotta start somewhere. I beg my students always, don't start dead center. You don't want a bullseye, so you don't want to plot something right there. And I'll quickly go to erase it, because I don't want you doing that. So I always say the first flower that you put down should be on uneven distances from the north side, east, west, and south side of your paper. So I'd say let's bring it down like over here, where I actually have it touching all 4 quadrants. So a little bit is touching quadrant number 2, most of it is in quadrant number 3, and a little sliver is in quadrant number 4. So we're going to start with a flower here, and I gave it a full circle, because I'll have this one open. Let's bring up something that's just above it, that's maybe a little odder shape. It's not a full circle. I don't want that too repetitious. I find this all just coming over here. And let's attach another one kind of like up here. So I'm giving myself circles as to where I'm going to place these flowers. So right now, This is kind of coming in, it's curvilinear. I'll create a flower out of this. Let's say we have a few of these smaller bulb, these closed ones down here. So it's, right now this is touching, but I have this nice curve going on. I'm going to be using stems and leaves to break up all that negative space. And then let's say we have one. I'm placing one again. So I have one over here, but I'm going to have it partially come down lower. And maybe I'll have part of one over here so it's attached coming in at an angle. So we have an oblique here, an oblique here, an oblique here. So we'll have one shooting up over here. So again, I could have just put a circle to demonstrate where I'm plotting that. But, so now you plot your main flowers, and now I'm going to go back. I may have one, just a part of one, these small, these are ones that aren't open, like just right down there. So I haven't duplicated. To take a look, my positive and negative shapes in this quadrant, so we're talking positive. I have most of this flower, part of the top of that, a lot of negative space here. That's quadrant number 2. Quadrant number 1, I've got part of a flower, this is bleeding out, this is overlapped by this, but the positive and negative shapes are different from each other in all 4 quadrants. So what I like now is I like the big open, I have a nice triangular open negative shape here. I have a nice triangular negative shape here. I like this is flowing into this corner, another triangular shape here. So again, there's strength in triangular groupings. They help with a nice read of something asymmetrical. And again, this is going to be giving us different stages of growth, you know, from the beginning, the closing of the flower to the opening, to the full opening. This one will do full opening, and so on. So I'm going to go back now. These would be like light erasable lines that I would put down to placing my flower heads. You can go over with the stronger pencil line if you're confident in the drawing, and just come in there. I'm going to have this kind of open. I have this open flower petal right in the front. We'll have one like up over here. Okay, we have our pistils and stamens here. So this one's kind of over here. These are these closed buds that are forming. So I'm just giving a little more information on them. This one also will have a little more information on it there. This one is in band 1, 2, 3, 4. This one we have. This is bleeding and cutting it off. And here we have one over here where again, this is just bleeding up and out of that picture over there. We have one squeezed in here, so let's just do the tops. So we're missing the bottom of this piece. So these are all tightly growing like in a row. All right, so I would leave these unpainted. This is just like a pre-sketch, like a value sketch. I always kind of save, it's a little too dry. I try to save my dry markers for grays. Okay, so we need to plot, and those are only light shapes, but within those shapes, there'll be some contoured shadows. But we can come in now with some real rich darks and create some negative. So if these are all light shapes, and these are in the focal area, and your focal area is in the center area here. If you get pretty dark, so let's say we'll use 3 values and have to do a basic value. I'm getting all solid here, but these will break up. So I'm getting pretty dark in near the center flowers. And I'll give a little bit of dark. So this could be some light strokes that are vague. There's nothing definitive that would be here. I can start to introduce, here's a stem coming down. We can now start to introduce some leaf shapes that we would negatively define by filling in the black and leaving the leaf shapes white. But we're starting to work on some values here for drama. I'm going to get some dark values around these petals over here and just close to this center flower over here. So we're looking to create some drama of the dark. If I come in with the gray, All right, even if I just use line works, if I come in and do, this is trying to look lighter. So here's some mid values that I'm filling in some of these background areas. Still, you want to leave the lightest values for these light, delicate crocus flowers. And I'm looking to fill in some mid values just with some repetitious side-by-side strokes here. And again, in this area, you'll be coming in with some light leaves and some dark leaves. So this is all mid-grays or mid-tones, mid-values. They're going to have a painted background. All right, I'm hoping to get a nice dark one. This is in here. Okay, so now we have to come in. This is going to have, I'm using my fingernail just to scrape off. This is a stem kind of coming down. I'm reinstating the outline here. These are some light leaves, but then we can have some dark leaves. And you know, once you do a couple of these obliques of the leaves coming in, you know, it's tough to do second and third passages of the dry markers. Okay, so again, I'm looking to create some leaves that are jutting in here. You would be painting in mid values to some rich darks, and also some could be highlighted. So if I come in here and create a leaf that's emanating just next to these light flowers, it could be light at the where it's overlapping the dark background, and then it can turn darker. It's going to get darker as it projects into that mid-value area. All right, so you get that idea. So that's basically how I start placing my flowers and working on a simple value sketch of maybe just dark, mid-values, and light. And it's amazing how this ink is just drying lighter. So we'll move on to the painting. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to move around the back here. And I'm going to flip this mirror up. Andrea is zooming in, right? Mm-hmm. Get another print out. All right, so I recommend that if you have photographs you've taken or you've done some research on the internet, you don't rely on that photograph to be your image and subject matter. Do a couple of drawings and work with your drawings and maybe a few paintings first as warm-ups until you do a more formal compositional piece. So I know this is a reverse mirror, so you're all seeing this. Okay, so I prepared, I want to just pull this off a minute. Sometimes I'll actually plot my shapes and position them within a design for a composition. And if I like what's going on, I'll take a sheet of tracing paper, put some lead on the back, or I'm sorry, I'll just look right through and like I make a copy of this on the tracing paper. But this is similar to the simple value sketch that I just started before, where I have some circles in place where I position some of my main flower shapes, the crocus flowers, and they're in different stages. These two I would consider, there's three here, they're touching, and here they're overlapping. And that's really like a unit, but I just want you to see that diagonal movement here. And so this is protecting my good drawing to paint. But again, you can see I broke down my perimeter into 4 quadrants. And I'm looking at my flowers, and they're definitely, you know, off center. These two I consider they're slightly to the left of center. They're attached, so this whole shape almost reads as a continuous shape. I might keep these all in the same family, maybe have one that's a different color. These two are overlapping, so again, there's like a nice diagonal here, and then I have a lot of leaves at the bottom that are crisscrossing each other. I'll draw, again, a lot of the leaves you'll see are kind of upright, but diagonals are real important. They'll help the viewer travel through your piece. And I always like to balance some of those, especially if there's quite a few that are vertical. I'll run one that's on a nice bend shape, nice curve shape. Again, that's underneath and behind these. So again, I just want to show you how I'm breaking up my drawing, okay, how I plot it at first, using simple geometric shapes to position my flower heads. Then I go back in and I delineate the individual petals. I'm just going over with a darker pencil. And again, you can see my drawing is loose here, because again, I'm sitting up and I have a lot of freedom with my arm. But this pre-drawing that I did was at home, and it's a little tighter. So I'm hoping that because I'll be painting it, you can see how it's much tighter. Because I'm painting it, sitting up, I'm going to have a lot more energy in my arm that's free. So now here's something else that I like to do. I'll do another overlay, and I'll just use some simple markers. I'll show them to you. These aren't I have watercolor markers, but these aren't those. They're just a simple, you know, you can get a pack for $1 in the dollar store. And I pulled out some greens and some purples, yellow and an orange, and for my centers. I have a protective sheet over this. I'm just going to pull that away. So now you can see I started to block in. I'm going to keep them all in the purple family. I have some unpainted white shapes with the highlighted petals. And I'm going to keep the upper value quite light. It won't be white, but it'll be a light tint. So that the highlighted petals will really stand out on the crocus. And again, I have different stages of development. I have 4 that are closed over here, just partially closed. I'd say these 5 over here are partially closed, and these 2 are just starting to open, okay? So what's important is have some interesting flow, some space in between those shapes, so that we can appreciate their big solidness. So we have a variety of textures here. We've got 2 types of textures opposing each other. We've got these solid, soft, fleshy, delicate petals of the crocus flower, and they're light in color, light in value, and they're amidst all this grassy, lush, sinewy blades that are very textural. So we've got the high texture in the grass versus the smooth softness of the flowers. Okay, so that's big. It's nice to have this contrast in textures, as well as contrast in darks and lights, and as well as contrast in the types of colors that we choose. So I know I've got color charts behind me, which I usually put up during class time. And it's just reminding everyone of, you know, especially flowers. Nature is such a painter by itself. We have beautiful yellow-green, warm yellow greens in the leaves. And then there's some cooler, dark, warm greens in some of the shaded leaves that you'll see. So those yellow greens, I would throw them in this category here. So these are visual complements, and I'm just pairing them up. So these greens would be opposite these bluish reds on the color wheel, and if we added some stronger yellows, they'd be considered opposite your cooler blues, cobalt blue. And I'm going to come over here to the color wheel to point that violet. So you can see the greens, these, you get warm yellow greens are opposite your red violets and your blue violets. So we're dealing with some nice complementary colors. Complementary colors that are real pop vibration visually. So it's going to make this very exciting, even though, you know, like we're looking at some very delicate, soft, pastel-y violets, blue violets on this page. Okay. All right, so now, because I painted these and other flowers, I buy pads and pads of color charts at home. But something that I encourage you to do is to make a color chart for yourself, just on the colors that you may be using today. So with the crocus, some of us may own a few violets. So in my palette over here, I have a few violets. I have a quinacridone violet. I think I have permanent magenta. I've got, let's see, it was another Windsor violet. I have some cool reds. I have ochre, which is my nice cool hot pink, which I love. And I'll be mixing those with some of my exciting cooler blues. So the cooler blues will be those that don't have green in them. All your blues that have a little more red in them will be in the purplish, or like a purplish blue violets, like over here, like Verditer. This is actually a Blick Sky Blue. I have Cerulean I'll be using over here. This is Blue Gray by Holbein. And your Cobalts and Ultramarine. Those are your cool blues. I'm mixing those with some of the cool pinks to make some violets. Also on this chart, I've made just a few mixes with some yellows and greens. I don't like using greens right out of the tube when I'm painting something in nature. So I've mixed some lemon yellow with sap green, yellow.
Please come to the front office. Thank you.
I've mixed cadmium, lemon yellow and cadmium yellow also with sap green, with cadmium green pale, or if you have phthalo yellow, that's another good one, phthalo yellow green rather. I also mixed some sap green with some burnt sienna. So there's some nice combinations here. You can, paint. Here I'm putting the colors side by side, and here they fuse and they surge in the middle. So I have my opera opposite the blue gray. This is that beautiful violet that I'm getting right here in the center. This is opera and cerulean. This is the purple that I'm interested here. There's opera with cobalt. Here they are in the middle where they surge and mix and create a beautiful soft violet that you can't get out of the tube. Opera and Verditer, again, here's permanent magenta with a little cobalt. I have a nice blue violet there. Permanent rose with some cerulean. So again, you can have fun making some little charts for yourself before you jump in, and then you can also play with them and just practicing a few of the closed buds to see which of these violets that you like. I'll toss those over here. Okay, so this one a little closer. I usually work a little larger than this, but I wanted to keep it small for today. So I'm going to pull. All right, so I removed my overlays, and I do have a couple of prints of my paintings here, so in case I spatter them or something, I like working from my paintings. I have them here that I won't worry about ruining my originals. And let's say I have 2 pails of water. I have one for like rinsing off your brush full of paint. Then I go into the clean water to go into a nice cleans, and I mentioned that before, clean off your paints when you're dealing paint with flowers. So your paints aren't contaminated and your colors will be true. Nice and clean and crisp. I have a paper taped down on this is a lap board, and I have handy paper towels, a nice dish towel. I use a kitchen sponge to get excess water off my brush, and I've pulled a few brushes from one of my 2 brush bags so I don't need to waste time fishing for a brush. I'll actually leave this open in case I find I don't like the brush that I chose. So, and I have a mixture of synthetic brushes along with some good sable brushes. And sometimes you'd be surprised how I don't like the results of working with the sable brush, and I'll switch to a less expensive synthetic brush. So, doesn't mean, very expensive things are the answer to your problems. Okay. I usually like to start with painting some of the flowers first because my water's clean and my paints are clean. I just want to show you how clean these paints are. I put a lot of fresh paint out a couple days ago. I let it dry so it wouldn't be so gushy to work from. It's still soft to touch. If these were 2 weeks old, I would have sprayed them with, mixed them with some water first, but they're pretty soft to touch, so I think we're good to go. All right, so better to start out with a light, gentle hand and trying to, I think I'm gonna take my glasses off because they're steaming up on me. I'm not used to working with the mask. Better start it with a nice pale tint of the color. A tint is, again, just a lighter version, adding more water to your paint. If I was working with acrylics or oils, I'd be adding white to a color to make it a tint. And let's play around with some of those colors that I played around with on that color chart that I just showed you. All right, so I'm going to wet my brush. And this is a number 14 sable brush. I'm going to go into my permanent rose. And again, we want to have a nice clean mixing area also, because again, we're going to be pre-mixing. Some colors we'll be putting on directly and like feeding into one color to the other, like surging the color. And then we'll be pre-mixing some colors also. So you want to have a nice clean mixing area for you to do that. Opera is a nice, bright, cool, hot pink. It's almost like a psychedelic pink, just to show you what it looks like. See, it's quite strong, like that. So it's a little too strong for the colors I'm looking for, but if I put a little down, this is a flower here that's closed. It's starting to open here. I'm going to come right back and maybe put a little bit of, this is a sky blue. It's rather opaque, and the opera is pretty transparent. So I'm going to feed that in just to take very gently, and we're just going to gently feed this in. And it's okay if I go beyond my drawn lines, because if I come in with some greenery around them, I can get quite dark in the values like I did in the value sketch. So you can see how it's made a beautiful soft violet here. One thing about these sable brushes, there's a lot of hairs. You can see how wide this is. That's going to hold a lot of water. And to work on these tight petals, I really need a brush with fewer petals. I'm actually going to try, this is actually, looking for this, this is actually a Japanese lettering brush. This is going to give me less water and a little more control. So again, I can actually take a thirsty brush and pick up, I've got some puddles rather. You can see how light that dries. So it's a nice soft color. I may want to get a little stronger. Or again, I'm going to feed in a little more of that aqua, that cool pink, down near the base. And again, the light's coming from our upper right. Usually what I like to do, and I recommend, I draw a little sun. There's a little sunburst that's going to constantly remind me, hey, your sun's going to be bright. So highlights on the right, shadows on the left. Let's come down with a little bit of that blue-gray, and I guess actually go into a little bit of verditer blue, which is a little strong. Wow, we're getting like a real rich purple that was a little too soon to put in the picture. I'll go back into that sky blue. All right, so now I do have a puddle of aqua up here that I can play with, so I'm coming into that puddle with a little bit of that sky blue. And this area is dry, where again, that was all pretty wet. Like I can wait for it to calm down before I go in with a little more shadowing, but I can come in here now with a little bit of a darker value. That's the inside of the back side of these petals here. And then you can, I'm rinsing off that brush. I'm just going to come in with a little bit of water and soften that edge. Same here, I don't want a hard stroke. I'm coming to the top of the petal that's curved in. The front petal is all curving in like this, away. And again, we're trying to define that beautiful, fleshy, beautiful, soft, translucent tissue that the petals of flowers have. So we want to keep everything very soft and wet. And again, I keep going back and lifting some of that color. We're dragging the color up to the tops of the curved petals, the tips. And again, I'm not paying too close attention to, I went beyond the lines that I drew this with. So sometimes, again, if you're waiting for something to dry, it's a little too wet, I can move on to another flower. And then I'll come back to this to add my little darks, but let's try to do a few little darks. I'm going to go into verditer blue with a little bit of a drier amount of aqua. So not that much water on the brush. And again, this is a lettering brush. It's a number 12 round. So I get to a pretty fine point if I want. So again, I don't want to come in with too much water because this is wet, it's starting to dry, but I just want to get a little darker in the inside of the curve. That may be just too wet for it to take. So then I'm going to move on to another flower. So again, we have a nice softness to that one right there. Let's move on to this one here. So what I want to do now is, because this one's open, it's going to have some yellow in the center. I want to keep this area pretty dry. Then I want to come back in and feed maybe a cool lemon yellow, a cadmium yellow, maybe even a hot orange in the center. That'll be later. But again, you may have a little bit of that reflective color on the inside of those petals. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of cadmium yellow. And I'm just going to give a little tint on the inside of the lower part of the petals. Right here. I'm going to come back and lift that up. I can always blot. And I think I'm going to come with some Naples yellow. Okay, so now this one over here, instead of having to be the same pink, I'm going to go heavier on the blue. So I'm going to try a little bit of opera, and I'm going to add a little bit of that verditer blue and wash down a puddle, dilute it with some water. So it's going to be a cooler blue, but it's made with the same colors as this. So let's try that out over here. I tapped my sponge, I got rid of some of that paint, dried it off on the sponge, and I'm just coming back with water just to lighten this upper edge here. Well, this is what I just want to show you how, let's say, if you're working really tight and you know, oh God, I said the darker value of the backside of this petal went into the highlight top of this. You can come in while it's wet or when it's dry and lift out this edge with a wet, thirsty brush. So here I'm cleaning up that right there with the thirsty brush. I'm going to clean up a little bit at the top of this one with the wet, thirsty brush. I can come over here and do the same here, where the sun's coming from upper right. Let's lift out a little bit of the light on the inside of this cooked petal over there. And again, rinse out the brush, dry it off. Here I'm just going to soften this open white shape on this petal over here. Go back to flower number 2. So now we're going to go to the back leaves, and I may introduce a little more pink, because sometimes the insides of the flower petals are slightly different than the colors of the outside surface. That was a little more red, a little more of that opera in there, so it's a little slightly different color than the outside. Again, I'm tapping this to lift out a little bit of the color, getting a nice softness. Again, we're looking for that nice fleshy smoothness of the inside contours of these petals here. And I'm going to come back with a little more blue. I don't want as much water in my mixing puddle, so I'm just getting a little darker, again, along the right side of the inside of these back petals. And I'm re-entering this just to darken it a touch, and I'm going to darken it where this petal tucks in behind the petal in front of it. So we're getting a little more shaping now. They're looking a little more three-dimensional as opposed to just a flat color. I'm going to get a little darker coming down. And every time I come with a full stroke of a deeper passage of paint, I come back to kind of soften where I re-entered, to just so I have like a streakless, brushless look. So this has to do with good timing now, going back into these petals so that I don't get some blooms. As this starts to dry, we have the windows open here too, so there's a little more air that this may dry faster. So now I'm going to go in with some of these darker washes that I have from the flower number 2. We're going to go back over here. Let's go and darken a little bit. This center petal, there's a petal in between these two. I'm going to make darker here. I'm going to come with an upward stroke. I'm going to split the hairs now of my brush. I still have some color on here. And we're just going to come up and get this like striated pattern that you do see on the flesh. Like these like little ridges. You'll see when the lighting's just so. So remember, if my time runs out, you will have seen me do enough flowers for you to finish what you've started. And I'm just getting a little darker and a little darker over here. And again, I'm trying to maintain, I'm really watching the amount of water every time I go back in to darken something. I'm really feathering my strokes so that I don't get a bloom. But where it's starting to get a nice soft look. I'm going to go back with my lifting brush. So this is like a tongue, we call this a tongue shape. It's a number 10. It's an English brush. And I can use it to lift out like a nice highlighted edge. I can clean up some things here. I can create a highlighted edge on some of these petals. So again, just lifting it a nice slope so at least you know you have this. Otherwise you'd be just painting negatively, saving some of your white shapes. I'm looking for a darker blue and get a little cobalt blue. And just bring it in. Okay. All right, so let's move on. I want to just finish this little. We're getting a foreshortened view of the back petal, especially the ones on the side. So we're seeing like 3/4 of these, and we're seeing like the back side, like a little bit of the furled edge coming in. Let's do the center of this. So this has the center exposed, so I'm going to just come in with some cadmium yellow medium, and I can keep the same. This is actually a different brush. It's a number 10 round. And I don't have a lot of water. Now, this is pretty dry. So this edge was dry, so thank God, because if it wasn't, that would have bled down into that front petal. Let's come back with a little lemon yellow to feed in on the tops of these here. I'm going to come back, and this number 10 round comes down to a nice point for me. I'm going to come back with some yellow ochre and a pretty dry brush. I'm just getting a little bit, really saturating the tip so I get a thick, darker yellow that's going to feed in and give me a little bit of like recessed textures of what's going on in the centers where you have a pistil and some stamens, anthers there. I'm going to come back with a little bit of hot orange. Feed that in while that's wet, so that gave it like a nice center. Okay, and now I'm going to go again, rinse out your brush in your dirty water and then take clean water from your clean pail of water. I need to just come back in and just fill in the back side of this petal. This is concave. Okay, and let's see, let's go back to, I'm looking for my lettering. Here it is, it's upside down. Okay, now let's try that sky blue with some opera. rinse out the brush, and I'm gonna come back and we're gonna lift out a little bit of value.
The mirror. The mirror.
I'm sorry.
The mirror.
Oh, it's down
Well,
more like this?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, let me just tighten this. Okay, this has it, I wish I had petals. All right, so I'm gonna come back just with some clean water. And I get rid of the excess water. We're just gonna come back and we're gonna just feather this. So I'm stretching the color, it's drawing pretty fast. It's got a little lighter on this front petal. Okay, so I'm moving, let's move over here. I can always go back into these. It's like sometimes they're so I'm waiting for them to dry, where I can go in and manipulate them, even like I'll have to re-wet them, but I may have a better shot. All right, so this flower is partially behind the one in front, and I'm going to try to get a little darker. I tap my brush, I get rid of that excess paint and water, and I'll come back with just a thirsty brush. This is a very soft brush, and we're just going to feather the top here where I don't want it to be totally white, but I'll certainly get a lighter. I'm actually lifting up a little bit of that paint to get a lighter value on the tops of those. As I see this, I'm coming back, this leaf over here. I have a little bit of a blossoming mark over here, so I'm just going to come in and darken this a touch. I get rid of the excess water on my sponge, and I'm just evening out those strokes here. And I overlapped the flower in front of it, where I can, again, I can use a flat brush or that tongue brush and lift out this edge so that it definitely reads this flower is overlapping that one there. Okay, so let's say in the center. I'm coming, that was cad yellow, and then I'm coming with a little bit of yellow ochre. And I did have that yellow bleed into that petal. But I think I'm just going to let it sit for now and move on back to this one over here. So again, now I was using Verdita blue with the opera. I'm going a little heavier on the blue. So I put some paint down there. Rinse out that brush and just coming back with water, we're going to feed that value up to the top so it's half the value. I'm going to stretch this out. I'm trying not, this is kind of wet. You can see how the paper's bubbling, so it's telling me it's damp. Let me just check this here. Okay. I'm just stretching this out. Okay, so we've gotten some color down on these flowers, and what I want to do, just for time's sake, is just to come in real quickly. Let's use a large brush. And let's just come in with a lighter value away from the top. I'm going to mix a large puddle I'm actually going to take a little bit, it's almost like pre-wetting, but I have a little bit of lemon yellow on my brush. It's a flat brush. And I'm working in between these negative spaces here. I'm going to pre-mix some lemon yellow with, this is cadmium green pale. It's similar to phthalo lemon green. And I'm just going to stretch this with some more at the top so it's very faint and light. And the lower 2/3 will be some dark grasses, but we'll have this light lemon green background color. I'm going to come back and I'm going to add a little bit more of lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, and some Windsor green. And we're going to come down here and get a little stronger. You can see how much stronger this is in color. So again, I'm feeding in the negative space with an underwash of some beautiful warm yellow, spring-like yellow greens. And these will be grasses that'll just shoot up and probably end up at the top here, going into this wet, misty, soft yellow-green background. And I'm letting this dry a little bit because we're going to go in and negatively, we're going to feed in. We can paint some dark leaves and we can go and paint the negative spaces with some dark green so that the leaves are this light value. And I'm just using up the paint that's left on my brush here. And let's use up this puddle. So again, I'm painting right up to some of these flower shapes, which I haven't even painted, but for time's sake, I just want to show you how to conduct some plausible ways and what to do with your negative space in the background. And the flowers are looking pretty light, so the idea is to get a little darker. I'm going to mix some yellow ochre now with and I'm using the same flat brush. So it's yellow ochre with a little burnt sienna, and I'm going to use that same Windsor emerald. So we're going to get a darker, Windsor emerald is a cold, cool green. It's a good color for shade and shadow. But I'm warming it up with yellow ochre and burnt sienna. Okay, so now we can come in with some large areas or some small areas or individual blades where this is still wet, so we may get some nice runny, soft sides or blades. So let's try up. And because this is wet, you're going to get these soft, out of focus blades of grass. And if we come up close and tight, we can define a nice edge. And you can see I'm just going back and forth, crisscrossing. Some of this is bled and just giving me some nice soft solid areas. But again, I can go with some richer darks to create some deep recessed negative areas and to leave some of this value showing as a lighter leaf. It's very wet down in here, but at this point too, you can also scratch out some leaves if you have a palette knife. I'm just using, this is like a nice bendable gift card versus a palette knife, which is like stiff. And sometimes you're not sure of the surfaces of these papers. They all react differently to scratching out. But you want to wait until the leaves are shine as they're wet and they're starting to dry, that I can go in and we'll try lifting out a few blades of So we've pulled out some lights versus, you can also come and paint some darks. It's a little too wet right down here to do that. I'm coming back in. I want to tighten some of the darker shadows in the flower areas. So now because it's dry, I'm coming in with little darker values that are really shaping up and giving you some contour now to the convex and concave rather, contours of the petals. And we're getting a nice three-dimensional look. So again, that's why we started out softer with softer values. I want to get in here and get a little darker on the inside of. I grabbed the wrong brush that looked like my lettering brush. So here we go back to the lettering brush. So you can see how this is progressing. So again, I'm going back to like feed in some stronger values. Again, I have to keep the fleshy, soft surface of the petals as I go back in. I'm trying to soften some of these hard edges. Again, you can use a flat brush to clean up some of these shapes. And as this is starting to dry here, I just want to come back with a nice rich, like a Van Dyke brown, and a little bit of Hooker's green. And I wanted to create some nice, rich, dark, negative, recessed areas down here, like in between some of the leaves. So we're getting a nice little depth coming in. So some of this is still drying, so I'm getting a soft edge. If I hit an area where it's almost dry or pretty dry, then I'll get a hard edge. So I like going in right now when it's like in the in-between stage. And we're getting a nice crisscrossing, and I'm trying to get a nice variety of different greens. So again, you can mix the cool brown or the burnt sienna with the sap green, with the Windsor green, and get a nice variety of different greens going on here. And again, I'm actually trying to pull up some of my pencil images that are coming through. So now we have a little depth of field. Like these flowers are, different distances from each other. The fact that they're not touching or they're overlapping or saying they're in front of one another gives you a little bit of depth of field. But the minute we start giving some nice recessed areas and pockets of depth and darknesses, even earth color down in the weedy grasses, it gives it a nice deep depth and it's a nice dark contrast too. And again, we have a variety of complementary greens going on here that's helping to pop. So you could see where I'm going with this. I'm getting some interesting details down here without doing too much work. And I'm constantly going back and reevaluating the darker shadows and shades within each flower. And Zana, how are we doing on time?
We need to wrap up.
We need to wrap up? Okay. So you can see how this is progressing. So I go from flower to flower. I gave an overall light tint to that background, which is going to help the whites to pop out. We've kept the value of the flowers very soft and delicate. So I'm working to get darker and richer in the grassy area. So again, nice smooth, fleshy skin or petals, tissue. They're smooth, the texture's smooth, contrasting to these spiky blades of the grass. And I can't see enough of that. As we start drawing, you can go in and get cleaner, little negative, deep shapes here. You can keep getting darker, and if you add some brown, it'll get warmer in color. That adds a little more interest and a little more depth of field, and so on. And to continue this, I would definitely, clean up some of the edges on the flower petals. You could do a little bit of outline work. If I go into my dried petals here of my purples, you could come in and actually paint in a few of the lines. You're going to reinstate your pencil lines by giving a little bit of an edge. So we're making the flowers kind of pop out with a little bit of line. I wouldn't go and put a continuous line on each one of them, but it's helping to pop out and give a little more dimension to the separate forms of the petals. And give a little more definition like you saw there, and it's progressive. And you can also take your purples, just want to show you this. Purples on top of the green look very nice, so giving a little more harmony to your color palette. You can go in, while my dark greens are wet, let's come with some purples and create some dark holes and negative shapes. Having the purple mix in with those greens, giving us a lovely different dark green, and helping to bring some of the color of the flowers into your greenery, giving a more harmonious look to the overall composition. So I'm feeding that in also while some of this is still wet. So again, I'm gonna wrap it up now and wish you good painting, and we'll continue with some more flowers through the rest of the spring. And it's good to see everyone. I said my love, and stay safe and be well.